society. 1% of the world's population control 46% of the world's wealth. The top 1% control 46% of the world's wealth. Whereas the bottom 50% have access to barely 1% of the world's wealth. And this inequality has been growing up over time. Many of you may have heard of this book called Capital in the 21st Century that Piketty, the French economist, wrote. And it's a frightening, it's a scary circumstance. And I can go on and on, but the point is that companies whom we work for, whom we cherish, who we celebrate in business schools have a lot to actually do with this situation. And as a result of this, there have been a lot of calls to question capitalism, as a model. It's been called capitalism in crisis. There's this sense of unfairness. You might have heard of the Occupy Wall Street movement. But long story short, what's happened historically is that companies have taken wealth away from societies, have taken environmental value away from societies, and have bolstered their bottom line kind of in exchange for that. And this is a phenomenon that's actually well documented in the social sciences. It's called the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons is this context where if everybody tries to maximize their own ultimate gain or their own bottom line, then collectively we lose out. So global warming is a fine example of tragedy of the commons, because it has now been established that it's fairly certain that this is kind of human-made. It's a human-made problem, and again, corporations have had an active role in this. So it's time, essentially, if we are to survive as a species, that we kind of move from this tragedy of the commons context to a context where companies create social value and environmental value. And that's where my research comes in. And I want to propose to you that in this endeavor for creating social and environmental value, companies can actually also make money for themselves, can increase profitability if they are strategic in their approach to environmental and social well-being. So I work in this area that's essentially called the triple bottom line. So Milton Friedman, the celebrated Nobel laureate economist, he wrote in an article in 1970 that the social responsibility of business is to make profits. The social responsibility of business is to make profits, as long as they are within the realms of the law. He did say that. But I want to argue today that that's not enough for companies. They have to go beyond the letter of the law and go beyond the spirit of the law even, to embrace social initiatives and environmental initiatives, and in the process discover that that's not all bad, that there is financial value to be extracted from strategically engaging in this triple bottom line as well. And what kind of value, business value, are we talking about that companies can get out of this process? It's very clear. Research shows that employees work harder on behalf of the organization. Your existing employee base is more likely to stay with you if you engage them in corporate responsibility initiatives. It's very clear that your customers are willing to pay more price for your products, and they'll be more loyal to your brand in these contexts. So there are a number of outcomes that, through my research over the years, that I've established that companies can derive from kind of engaging in social and environmental initiatives. And how does that actually happen? How does that play out? If you think about the way that value can be created, and I'm thinking about not a company that's kind of reacting to some disaster or has been accused of wrongdoing, but a company that's genuinely interested in corporate responsibility, and there are several of those who are out there today. But if you think about the ways that value can be created, essentially I posit that there are two routes to value creation, and I call these the direct route and the indirect route. And I want to explain these to you briefly before getting into that indirect route much more in much more detail. So, if you take a simple example whereby let's say employees carpool to work, and this is something that's happening in SAP, for example, one company. So I saw that there was a fair amount of Germany might indeed be the largest nationality that's represented in this event today, right? There were like 4 or 5 of my friends here from Germany this evening. A few here, a few there. So SAP, large German company, and they have instilled this policy that employees are going to carpool to work. So when you carpool to work, what does happen is that you save on gasoline or petrol. There's something that costs money, so there's a financial benefit, there's a business benefit, and it's a precious resource that we're using, something that again goes directly into this tragedy of the commons phenomenon, because we don't know when we're going to run out of it. So we're conserving a precious resource, so there's a societal outcome as well. But then, the more interesting, and that's the direct route, but the other aspect to it, which I find more interesting anyway, is the indirect route, which is how do your stakeholders react to the fact that you are carpooling to work? So what do your customers make of this? What do your investors make of this? What do your suppliers make of it? What do your employees make of it? And if we can understand the conditions under which your stakeholders actually reward the company for what they're doing in the social and environmental realm, then that can also add to the bottom line of profit. So if, for example, your customers are going to be more loyal to you, they're going to buy more of your product than of your competitors because of your social and environmental initiative, then that adds to the bottom line as well. And that's the stakeholder route, or the indirect route to value creation in this. And this is what I study. So the direct route essentially deals with things like carbon footprinting, water footprinting, waste management, all kinds of environmental issues. And companies have gotten pretty savvy in kind of managing that part, at least in part to regulatory pressure, to other stakeholder pressure, etc. But understanding stakeholders is not something that companies actually are doing on an active basis, or that most companies are doing on an active basis. And my thesis is that if you engage in research to understand your stakeholders and understand the conditions under which they react positively to you, you can actually benefit from that. You can actually create both more of the social and environmental value, both the people and the planet part, and you can add to profit as well. So with this understanding, my co-authors and I over the past several years have engaged in this research program where we study stakeholders, and we study all kinds of stakeholders, so employees, customers, investors, what have you. And we try to understand under what conditions do they actually reward companies. And that's a long story, essentially, and there's a book about it. I mean, if you want to read the book, that's that you're very welcome to. And what I've done is I've brought some flyers for that book. If you want to take one of those at the end, you're most welcome. But in essence, in a nutshell, we can boil down the stakeholder reactions to a very simple framework that one can remember. And I call it the 3 U's framework, because I talk about 3 factors that all start with the letter U. And those 3 are understanding, usefulness, and unity. And what do these mean? So, understanding, the first U. What we found in our research was that many stakeholders are not even aware of what a company does in the corporate responsibility realm, in the sustainability realm. And if someone doesn't know what you do, there's no way they can reward you for it. I mean, that's plain and simple. So we found in consumer companies awareness to be about 15 to 20% amongst consumers. in very well-managed companies we're talking about, that they knew about what companies are doing in the social and environmental realms. We studied employees, and we found that about 50% of the employees know, at best 50% of the employees know. Now that's alarming, because that means about half your employee base doesn't even know what you're doing. And if that happens, then there's no way they can reward you for it. So increasing stakeholder awareness about what it is that you do in the corporate responsibility realm is job one. And that's not an easy task, because communication about corporate responsibility immediately leads to kind of skepticism from stakeholders. Okay, why are they telling me this? Why are they talking about it? So there are a bunch of communication strategies or to-dos that you might follow in that regard. And I always say, be fact-based, try to have others tell your story for you, etc. But the skepticism that consumers or employees have about when a company engages in corporate responsibility is the second factor, or we call it the attributions, essentially. It's the second component, of understanding. Attributions. So when companies engage in these initiatives, stakeholders attribute this to either extrinsic motives, or they're just doing this for the money, or to intrinsic motives, well, they really care about the community. And what our research shows is that unless stakeholders attribute intrinsic attributions to your actions, they're not going to reward you for it. So in other words, it's important for them to feel that you do care about the community, or that you do care about the environment, and that's why you're engaging in this initiative. Now, that does not mean that they do not endorse a hybrid motive, or one where there's both intrinsic and extrinsic motives. And in fact, they love that the most. It was quite fascinating to learn through the research, because stakeholders simply said, well, if there's a market motive behind corporate responsibility, that's when companies are going to put their muscle behind it. If they think about it only that it's for the good well-being of the community, or for the well-being of the environment, they're going to treat it more like philanthropy or charity, and that's not going to go anywhere. But when they say, yes, there is a market motive behind it, they treat it more as a business. So as long as companies do have an intrinsic motive, and they do care about the community, and they want to make a difference, it's perfectly fine to have a market motive as well. And therefore, companies do not need to hide the fact that they have a market motive, or they do not need to be overly altruistic or appear overly altruistic when they talk about their corporate responsibility. That's the second thing. The third thing is effectiveness. That's the third component of understanding. And what does effectiveness mean? Effectiveness means that stakeholders want to see companies make a difference in the arena, whatever arena of corporate responsibility that they're engaging in. Stakeholders want to see a difference that you're making. So they want to know about what it is that you're doing. Because it's very hard for stakeholders to relate to kind of grand stories like, oh, we are spending so much money on our corporate responsibility. So E.ON is one company. It's a large energy company based out of also a German company who I've worked with quite a bit. And they, for example, on their website, they will say we're spending hundreds of millions of euros on our renewable energy initiatives. Stakeholders cannot relate to that. But they can relate to the fact that E.ON, through their program, have kept 100 people or 1,000 people warm during the winter. I mean, that's something E.ON actually does. I mean, they provide energy to those who cannot afford energy, and that helps people, particularly in the UK, they have a very prominent program. So stakeholders would rather know about the difference that you've made, and that leads to one implication, which is that companies should focus on outcomes that they have achieved rather than the inputs in terms of how much money they spend. So that's understanding. The second U is usefulness. And usefulness relates to the fact that much like products and services serve some fundamental needs that human beings have, corporate responsibility initiatives also serve some fundamental needs. Or they're more effective at generating returns from stakeholders when they fulfill certain needs. So one of the companies I work for in this area is Procter & Gamble. And Procter & Gamble in the US, they have this program which is called Crest Healthy Smiles. So Crest is a brand of toothpaste, sure many of you know that. Crest Healthy Smiles is actually a program where Procter & Gamble goes into inner city neighborhoods in the United States and teach children how to take better care of their teeth. These are children from families that cannot afford dental health care. They cannot afford to send the children to the dentist. They're just poor. They have low education levels, low income levels. So we studied the parents of these children, and it was quite fascinating. And what we learned was that as a result of the program, not only did the children learn about better dental health and attend school more often. So 50 million school days are lost in the United States due to poor dental health. So if you can make the children better at this part and make them go to school, it's a tangible social outcome. So the attendance at school improved. They were brushing their teeth, they were flossing their teeth more regularly. And these are functional needs that the initiative was fulfilling. But then there were many psychosocial needs or identity-related needs that the program was fulfilling as well. So the children were smiling more, they were more confident. Their self-confidence went up. They were smiling more, they were making more friends. And these are benefits, again, that are at a higher level. And if you can fulfill these kind of needs and deliver on these benefits, the program is more effective. And when we spoke to these parents, they said that they would support the program by buying the products of the company because they want the program to keep on growing so that more people could benefit from this program just like their children was. Now, what does this mean? This means that companies, instead of kind of getting into any cause willy-nilly just because it's their CEO or their senior management believes in a particular cause, getting into it, it's much better to kind of do research amongst their stakeholder base and find out what causes to engage in. So go outside in when it comes to the cause rather than inside out. And that's likely to lead to more beneficial outcomes for the company. The other thing to keep in mind when choosing causes is that companies need to choose causes in their area of expertise, something that they can credibly deliver in. So P&G can credibly deliver something in the area of dental health because they know a lot about dental health. Allianz, the insurance company, can deliver something on financial literacy because they know something about it. But they're equally brilliant failures. So PNC Bank, for example, one of the large banks in the United States, they went into a program for school readiness. So they were like preparing young children, in the preschool children, 3 to 5 year olds, to get better educated. Now that's not something that they have much expertise in, and needless to say, that program didn't really succeed very well. So, but the tenet of usefulness essentially suggests to companies that, okay, find out what causes you want to get involved in before you actually engage in them. Do market research. The third U is unity, which is the sense of identification with the company, or sense of belongingness with the company, which is actually critical because that's what drives the outcomes. So that's what drives employee loyalty or customer loyalty. That's what drives intention to pay price premium, working harder on behalf of the company. And unity, that sense of belongingness comes when you share the values that the company has and and see an overlap between your values and the company's values. And that happens when you have higher levels of understanding and higher levels of usefulness of these programs. I want to give you one example of unity. I mean, we have several quotes in the book, but one example was from an employee who basically said, I want to stay at this company because of the good things that they do, and I don't want to die thinking that I've been selling soap all my life. And this was actually an employee who was selling soap. But he wants this higher purpose. And research shows that each of us wants this higher purpose, and to attain this higher purpose, whatever it is that we do. And if companies can work on corporate responsibility, and that enables us to at least aspire or connect to this kind of higher purpose and gives us the sense that we are doing something meaningful for society or for the environment, things that matter, then that immediately leads to this sense of unity, which drives these good outcomes. A very hot area today is employee attraction. How do we attract good employees to our company? And the talent for employees is actually more than the fight for good employees, is more than the fight for good customers, is more intense. And the younger generation, the people who are Generation Y or the millennials, they are actually quite fanatic about working for a company that has good values and where they can make an impact on the job. So making an impact on the job scores as one of the top 3 factors that they look for, the younger generation looks for when actually seeking employability. So for that reason, again, I mean, it behooves companies to think about what kinds of areas they want to get into. And I cannot get into the details of the statistics here, but essentially we can show that all else equal, even when you control for things like product quality, when you control for things like price, advertising, things that traditionally drive consumer behavior, even when those are controlled for, we are able to show that CSR, engagement in CSR, or the understanding and usefulness and unity of CSR, does drive consumer behavior as well, in terms of consumer loyalty. Resilience to negative information, another very, very valuable outcome. So consumers become more resilient to negative information about the company once they engage in CSR, are aware of the CSR initiatives and so on. The same on investors front. So there's research of mine that shows that investors actually react to the CSR reports that companies publish. And depending on the quality of the news in the CSR report, the stock market reacts. Employees are the strongest link, I mentioned that. So every company, whether it's B2B, B2C, small, big, every company can benefit by engaging their employees in corporate responsibility initiatives. And there was one recent paper of mine that just got published that shows that employees, frontline employees of a financial services company, it's called